Courts in a government environment are kind of unusual, especially, I guess, in a city environment. The court process almost works outside of the normal internal controls of a city. Many times they sort of function separately. They're controlled a lot of times by a higher government, maybe state or federal, and because of that, they kind of operate independently. And that's kind of an area in governments where there could be some issues with internal controls, especially over the revenue side, because they have so many different sources of revenues coming in. Some revenues may come from a state or federal government, maybe through grants or through just general operating revenues. But a lot of what they do, as we know, are fines and penalties, court costs issued by a judge, maybe traffic violations. And because of that, there's a lot of small amounts of revenues and small dollar amounts that are flowing through a court system daily or weekly that have to be accounted for. And obviously because of that, there needs to be strong internal controls. But the issue with that makes it difficult is that there's usually a judge or some other process that's telling people how much they need to pay based on some type of a penalty. So the revenues on that may not be consistent. There's no way to really judge on what's coming in based on any kind of prior year comparison. So you really have to rely on internal controls. A lot of those amounts are going to be cash or cashier's checks or any kind of highly negotiable instrument. So you really need to have controls over that area as far as collections, making sure what's adjudicated comes in correctly, gets deposited. You also have to really trust your employees to do a good job of accounting for that. And a lot of that we get into issues of making sure that there's a good line of independence with employees related to their job. For instance, you might want to make sure your court employees aren't moonlighting or have a second job with a bail bond company or maybe with a law firm or any kind of issue like that where there could be a problem between what they do during the day and what they may do on the weekends. And a lot of times cities and governments don't really go through a process of discussing that with their employees and saying, you do know there's a conflict of interest, if you have a second job, and some of those may have that. So I couldn't stress enough that in the control process, probably communicating real well with your employees, the importance of having strong controls and documentation and making sure that your employees, know the pitfalls of conflicting jobs is very important. So those are some of the big issues that we have just in that court process. Sort of operates independently, yet it's within a city. Specific employees that follow a big, highly regulated type industry, a lot of small, highly negotiable transactions, and really no way to gauge any consistency in revenues. And that's a perfect environment of wanting to have strong internal controls to make sure that all of your revenues accounted for appropriately.